Welcome to the future we need and how to get it. All over the world, and right here on the Central Coast, people at all levels of society are stepping up to assure that we actually do still have a future, and one we can all live with. In this 7-part series, we tell the stories of their successes so far and what we can learn from them. Distilling out what seems to be making these successes possible, there are at least 7 patterns of citizen power at work. The trick is to use these powers in conjunction with each other. By making the most of our many strengths and connecting our many different issues and inventions into coherent strategies, we give ourselves the pivotal focus and the collective power to actually unrig the system and win through to a livable future. For this month, we focus on our 5th source of social power and our 5th target of deep systems change, politics. How do we take back our public conversations and focus them on what really matters to us, pulling together to actually make happen the changes we really need? We also get back to the beliefs that get in the way of our social action, the 5th myth. We go back again to look at what we have called the 5th myth, the last of them. The belief that it is we who are the problem. We are hopelessly divided, and our very nature is just too violent, greedy, indifferent, or foolish to do what's needed. Well, maybe. Our story's not over yet. There's really 3 claims here. First, that we disagree too much to make our democracy work. We're taking that one on tonight. The second, that what is wrong is in our very nature, so much so that there just is no way out. We take that one on in our next show on systems change. And the last is that even if there is a way out in theory, we don't have the power or the smarts or the unity to make it happen. That's the focus of our last show in the series, What We Can Do. For now, we've been had. Divide and conquer. That's the oldest trick in the book. Keep us fighting each other, and we don't turn around and challenge our real enemies, the moneyed interests that benefit from the current arrangements, even when not much is working well for the rest of us. For in fact, it is not really we the people who frame the issues at all, even though these are the issues that we end up voting over and fighting over, even though in the end we wrap up our own identities and the identities of our communities around these issues framed by other people. And here's the real irony. It turns out that survey after survey shows that Americans, we the people, some 80% of us agree on most of the matters of public policy that most need addressing. Net neutrality, 83% agree. Tossing out Citizens United, 78%. Gun control, 97%. Education funding, 86%, improving it. Backing the DACA dreamers, 79%. Taxing the wealthy, 80%. Term limits for Congress, 75%. Ending civil asset forfeiture, 84%. Legalizing medical marijuana all over the U.S., 83%. Rejecting neo-Nazi and related ideas, 83%. Opposing sanctuary cities, 80%. Opposing banning handguns, 76%. The United States may seem like a divided nation, but there are actually plenty of issues that people of all political affiliations agree on. The problem is that our own elected officials don't often care enough to listen. If members of Congress were actually representing the people rather than private interests, they would be paying attention to this list of issues. They would be tackled immediately due to the massive popular support. So it turns out, when we look more closely, that the bubbles we live in aren't just an accidental side effect of social media.
Yes.
They result from conscious manipulation, scientifically, systematically pursued. Listen to this video.
When I was running my campaign, I understood all of the data that they were using because it was the same data that I used to use to manipulate people in advertising and marketing. Yeah, big loud warning bell went off in my head. And it's all based on data that they collect from us. to group us then into 66 groups across the country. This is like 66 different Americas have been identified, and they use this data in elections to sell us politics just like they sell us products and services. Now, I'm just one of 350 million or so people in this country, but all of us are caught up in this web, all of us. There's no exceptions. And it's all based on these 66 groups that were designed in the 90s to push our buttons and exploit our need to belong. And the reason it's ripping our country apart is because it's fake belonging. We really want to be part of a group. But right now, our groups are so isolated from each other, we don't feel part of the bigger group called America.
So, how do we stop fighting each other? Here we are caught in a trap of someone else's making, but at the same time, in response to this, there is a growing awareness of the trap and a movement out of it by activists at both ends of the political spectrum, willing to work together to wrest back control of our democracy. Here's Michael Osterlenk, co-founder and national director of the Conservative Liberty Coalition, talking about it in this video clip.
What my recommendation is to both my liberal friends and even my conservative friends trying to do the opposite, my liberal friends, is to have your ends in mind, but be loose on your means. Approach the folks from the other side of the political spectrum, and I should say actually the other sides of the political spectrum, because it's not just left and right, and tell them what you want to accomplish. See if they agree with the ends that you seek. And in conversations, dialogues, and debates, see if you can figure out, hammer out a means to that ends that's transpartisan in nature.
This emerging movement has a name. It's called the Transpartisan Movement. In December 2014, in his blog, Bill Shireman, and I'm mostly quoting him here, took note of the fact that Van Jones, Newt Gingrich, Ralph Nader, and the Tea Party, along with MoveOn.org and its founder Joan Blades, had been working together across party boundaries to build a common agenda for criminal justice reform and more generally to combine forces to break the polarization and demonization that gridlocks the political process. Consumer advocate Nader and anti-tax crusader Norquist are joining to combat what Nader calls corporate welfare and Norquist calls crony capitalism, the intertwining of government and corporate interests that can corrupt public policy. What draws these two together, in part, is revulsion at today's bitter partisan division and the sneaking suspicion that the political and cultural wars are being exploited to benefit powerful vested interests, where both major parties have grown so dependent on supersized vested interests that neither can be trusted any longer to do the people's business. So there's some books. We don't have time to go into them tonight. I will take note of Unstoppable, a book by Ralph Nader, advocating that we get together at the different political ends and get corporate power out of our politics. There's a video here that will give you the real flavor of it.
Years ago, my husband and I started a software company best known for flying toasters, which was a screensaver, and we sold the company for a lot of money. So I do feel like I have been blessed with more of the American dream than I ever hoped for. I'm a successful entrepreneur, for Pete's sake. How did that happen? I met Mark Meckler through a friend of a friend.
I remember the last line of the email, and the last line said, "God help the politicians if MoveOn and the Tea Party ever agree on anything." Joan and I spent a lot of time on the phone and by email before we ever met. And she introduced me to the idea of living room conversations, which was this organization she was starting to foster the kinds of conversations we were having, conversations between people of different political perspectives.
two friends with a different view. Each invite two friends for conversation on whatever issue they've chosen in your living room. They're just really asking people to listen to each other and see if there's any common ground.
The first hour is spent just getting to know each other. What are you about? Why does this stuff even matter to you? And as you start to have those conversations, the walls tumble pretty quickly.
We wanted our first conversation to be one where we found some common ground. And we did, you know. There was so much common ground, we went overtime. And we really were just starting.
This movement is still in its earliest stages. It's already showing signs of its potential. You'll find more information on our website, but I do want to tell you now that we have guests tonight in the second half of our show that are walking this talk. Gail Yamauchi, who is helping start up Living Room Conversations here in Santa Cruz, will be with us, and another Linda Marin, who will be talking about Citizen Climate Lobby's experiences, very successful experiences with bipartisan lobbying. I've come to see this as what I call do-it-ourselves democracy, taking back the potential in all of this that I see here, the one we most need. For me, the notion started back in 1988 when I heard what happened in the Netherlands. In the story I'm about to tell you, it made me realize how much we've accidentally given away of our self-governance, going hat in hand to ask or even to protest to demand that the government solve our problems, forgetting that we the people, we are the government, and we are ever so much better at solving problems, especially the really big ones. So here's the story. In 1988, 1,200 seals washed up dead on the shores of the Netherlands, and not only there, but on neighboring shores as well, all within a very short time. The Dutch took that very seriously. They figured that humans aren't that different from seals. If seals were dying in such numbers, humans soon would be as well. Queen Beatrix, that December, when she went on the air, as she always did, to wish all her subjects a Merry Christmas, her message wasn't so merry. It sounded like this. Here is what she said. The earth is slowly dying. We human beings ourselves have become a threat to the planet. Those who no longer wish to disregard the insidious pollution and depredation of the environment are driven to despair. Then she went on to explain what she expected of the Dutch people. In response, the Dutch created their National Environmental Policy Plan, or Green Plan for short, what Joe Yeo described in 2009, and most of this story, as I'm telling it here, is his words, the world's most advanced national program for creating an economy that doesn't destroy the environment. It's the green equivalent of trying to put a man on the moon. In just one generation, the Dutch intend to slash much of their pollution by 70 to 90%, double their economy, and invest less than 3% of their GDP doing it. If it works, it will obviate the old debate about economic growth versus environmental protection and result in the world's first sustainable economy. The Netherlands, mind you, is one of the world's most crowded nations, with about 1,145 people per square mile, compared to the US with 70. Already by 2010, it was estimated that they were sharing their small country with 7 million cars, 15 million cows, and 450 million chickens. Much of the Dutch economy is tied to intensive agriculture, chemical production, and heavy industry, and to Holland's position as the transportation hub of Europe. Their environmental space, a measure of the land's capacity to sustain a given population, is tiny and well past full. To meet the goals needed, the Dutch planners evaluated all major environmental problems and the steps it would take to alleviate them, identified which players had a hand in worsening these problems, and sat them down at the negotiating table and said, look, for the good of your children and grandchildren, you have to meet these targets. We don't care how you achieve them within the limits of the law, but you must do it. So what has happened since? The Dutch rose to the challenge. They went on to invent all kinds of new ways of doing things, to launch whole new industries, becoming the top go-to innovators for all other places around the world, now seeking green edge tools, products, research, and protocols. They thus gave themselves not only a cleaner future, but a whole new economic edge. I remember when this all happened, I was so inspired. Now, I'm not saying it was all roses, it wasn't and isn't, but this experience is still for me today the point where my notion of what democracy is or could be and must become just exploded. I keep reading that in America today, 75% of the people do not trust the government. But we are the government. It's not even just our government that we don't trust, it's us. In a democracy, if we are self-governing, then the changes needed are not only in them but in us. To have rights, we must accept responsibilities. To keep our rights, we have to use our rights. We have to take back our power and fully exercise it to meet our real needs and do the right thing together. So I call it do it ourselves democracy. My understanding of what this means has deepened. In a nutshell, I can say it means we don't go to our electeds and demand that they sort out the differences between us. We do that ourselves and take responsibility for finding the solutions we can all live with across our differences. And then we elect those who commit to working with us on that basis and will make what we come up with happen. Of course, that also means dramatically reducing the power of money. But it is precisely we the people getting together, despite our differences, that is the only way that we can overpower the money interests. So how do we get together? How do we even start talking to each other again? Thankfully, the tools we need to do what's needed have been just exploding in number and effectiveness in democracy use all over the world. Brazil, Italy, India, Australia, Austria, England, Argentina, Bhutan, Uganda, Ireland, Scotland. Check out ncdd.org, the site of the National Coalition of Dialogue and Deliberation. It has thousands of individual and organizational members, hundreds of well-organized resources, and pretty much all of the approaches that have proven themselves repeatedly in difficult situations, along with excellent tools, training, and networks of experienced practitioners to talk with and work with. The Participate DB database is one of the most comprehensive available internationally that covers Internet tools for democracy. Its founder, Tim Bonneman, is with us this evening in the studio and will be one of our guests in the second half of the show. So here are just a few of the tools out there. To take but one of them, there's the Conversation Cafe, and there's a packet of cards, wallet-sized cards, that, given a good focusing question, can pretty simply, easily facilitated, guide people through such a process. Each small circle has someone who's agreed to keep people on track. Baby steps in doing what I see as do-it-ourselves democracy are out there. I talk about them on the website, and we'll talk a little bit more about Participate DB tonight. Participatory budgeting is the one taking off all over the world, and you'll hear more about that on the website as well. The idea started in Brazil. But of course, for any of this to work, we have to be willing and able to talk to each other. And as I said, we have many tools and techniques. But underneath it all is just still good old common sense and common courtesy. And this is what I've noticed, picking it up as we go. Not long after the 2010 election, 20 of us had just watched this stunningly upsetting National Geographic movie about climate change. We were asking, why can't we get folks to listen? While others were suggesting events we might do, someone stopped us, or at least he stopped me in my tracks with this blinding flash of the obvious. If you know somebody's only inviting you in to convince you of their point of view, and that's all the conversation's going to be about, you're just not going to want to go. No wonder. I wouldn't. We have to be in a real struggle together to find answers that none of us has yet about matters that really matter. It was one of those, well, duh, kind of moments. A few months later, I wanted to start up a dialogue with folks I figured differed from me in their politics. I met with a couple of such folks to see how we might do it, And a couple of talks about talking later, they said to me basically, well, what do you want to talk about and why? And if you want to get to know us, why don't you just come do something with us? We can talk politics or not, but meanwhile, we'd be getting something worthwhile done. Help us with our efforts to shelter the homeless and feed the poor. That got me thinking and got me to where I now say, to build bridges, we have to build barns. Back in the day when all came together to frame up a barn, well, it's still that kind of a thing. Do something good together, something physical or something fun, or both, and let the talking and the getting acquainted just kind of flow. Later, I put these things together and realized maybe we really are trying to talk to each other about the wrong things. Agendas other people have put out there for us, people who want nothing else but to see us stay really divided against each other, and far from the 80% of things we agree on, and even farther from things not on the airways much, like public banks or Les Leopold's campaign to put the cap on corporate corruption, things we might end up actually doing something about if we ever got together. Well, of course, that goes back to the videos we saw tonight. If you want people at odds with each other to get into the same rooms and seriously talk, get their trusted leaders together first, and the group of you figure out together all the rest of this. What do we talk about, and where, and when, and using what language, with what framing of the issues, and images, and topics, and how, of course, and all to what end, and how to get partisans from different sides to actually show up in enough numbers and with the right intentions to make the difference. So we can use the best methods. Start with queries and stories, appreciations and solutions chosen to make it easy to hear each other and to start building relationships and mutual trust. Focus on purposes and possibilities. Leave positions and personalities at the door. So what do we talk about? About real solutions. Good jobs, safe streets, smart kids, good kids, strong communities. We talk with each other not about the political agendas others have set who want to keep us divided, but about what really matters to all of us. If we start with our stories and actually hear each other's needs and fears, we keep rediscovering all the concerns we have in common, and also discover new ideas and energies and aspirations and willingness, even across conflict, to work together to help make promising solutions happen. For that is what actually does happen in such conversations. If you give them enough space, enough energy and fuel, something worth talking about, they come alive. They start on fire. So we emphasize not mainly our problems, and especially not our preset positions, but new possibilities that can better meet even our competing needs, at least well enough. The kinds of solutions we've talked about in every show so far in this series, every one of which can be put to work not only meeting our needs, but getting us talking again. Let's start with good jobs. How do we get folks in cities and out in the country truly good jobs? Not the jobs other people come in and give us and then take away, but jobs that do worthwhile work, cause no harm, pay well, treat people right, and don't up and move away. With do-it-ourselves democracy, we're that much closer to do-it-ourselves prosperity. We need not beg for government or big business to make it happen for us. Remember, we are the government and potentially the source of our own prosperity. For example, look at the evergreen co-ops. The world is a growing movement around the world to create worker-owned, worker-run co-ops, sometimes taking over or buying back companies that are failing or about to leave and successfully turning them around. The Bay Area has many worker co-ops and new ones emerging. Among the most influential in the U.S. is the set of evergreen co-ops in Cleveland, Ohio. They are not one co-op but 8, interlinked and interdependent. And of the greatest importance, they are not just appealing to the general public for business, but are under contract to several huge institutions. What in this model are called anchor institutions. You can see them at the top of this diagram, 2 hospitals and a university. They are committed to spending as much as possible of their several $billion a year budget right there in their own hometown of Cleveland. Together, these efforts are restoring a typically devastated and deserted Rust Belt city into a renewing metropolis whose budding prosperity turns not on businesses lured in by tax giveaways that can just up and move away, but truly worker-run companies with fair wages, just practices, impressive innovations. They're among the largest ever greenhouses and laundries, and positive impacts on the lives of all affected. Now again, I hasten to add, that doesn't mean they're perfect. Far from it. They are human after all. But it does mean that there are ways of designing and running systems that make it easier, rather than harder, to prosper, to grow the capacity, and do the right thing. That's promising for urban poverty, but what about rural, where poverty and anger is far more widespread across the U.S.? Well, rural poverty is the bad news, but here's the maybe not so very surprising good news. It turns out that it is in the countryside that entrepreneurs flourish. The data show that the smaller the town and the further from the city, the better the businesses do, with the most startups, the fewest failures, and the longest endurance. Here is the opportunity to move our economy from extraction to restoration. This is where the entrepreneurial skill and spirit can be put to work, restoring the soil and the health of habitat and the health of city dwellers who visit throughout the country. Going back to regenerative farming, remember Paul Hawken's book, Drawdown? And restorative ranching? What would it take to bring its 80 solutions in that book to the U.S. countryside to create successful, sustainable, homegrown businesses? And just where is all that renewable energy supposed to come from? And what about Eccles' prison work, making a profitable and truly restorative business with investment in social impact bonds? Politics doesn't have to be manipulated, fractured, divide and conquer tactics, covertly funded and media-based. It could be citizen-led, solution-centered, and systems-focused. It could be a do-it-ourselves democracy and bring us a do-it-ourselves prosperity. Take a minute, if you would, to imagine all the ways that we, the people, could take up even the few pivotal solutions we've looked at so far in this series and make our own jobs out of them, invest in them, and with them start moving out of poverty and into prosperity in all the corners of this land. And imagine what kinds of conversations we could have, and with whom, and about what, and from just how many different life experiences, clever ideas, and life's ambitions we could pull a future that we could all live with. And then imagine the kind of politics, the kind of solidarity and initiative and social investment and mass mobilization we could make happen out of all that.